Hey everybody, welcome back to Gettysburg 159. You're with the American Battlefield Trust and we are on the Gettysburg battlefield, and we're at a place where I'll bet fewer than 15% of you have ever stood. We are between the lines on July 2nd and July 3rd. We've got the town of Gettysburg about a half a mile behind the camera. That's Kris Dwight behind the camera there. You'll see and hear from him plenty on this video. Seminary Ridge off to my left and Cemetery Ridge off to my right. We are standing at the Bliss farm. You're going to learn a lot about the Bliss farm, but this is cool. There's monuments here. There's evidence of the farm here. Kris is going to talk about that as well. Let's come on over here as well, because here we are looking toward Cemetery Ridge. We got some trees in the way, but I'll wager you can see the Bryan farm over my shoulder. That's on North Cemetery Ridge, right as it meets Cemetery Hill. We've got the clump of trees over there, and check out the round tops off in the distance. So I hope you're oriented here. Seminary Ridge is about 300 or 400 yards behind me, and Cemetery Ridge is 400 or 500 yards off that way, and we are in the path of two different fights. On July 2nd, 1863, elements of Anderson's division move somewhat into this field. On July 3rd, of course, we are right on the field of Pickett's charge of Pettigrew's division at that time, and between those times, you have constant skirmishing going on between the Union and Confederate armies. They have smaller forces sent forward, and William Bliss found his farm in the middle of all that, and that's going to permanently impact him and his family. So with that, I think I'm going to grab the camera from Kris Dwight, and he's got lots to say about one of his favorite places, or Sarah is.
This is round robin. I had to grab notes, had to turn over a camera. Thanks everybody for watching today. Please share this with your friends, with your family. I want to give a shout out to our friends at Ancestry Fold 3 who've done a lot for us, giving us soldier stories and turning us on to some really cool items that will benefit you in the long run, including t-shirts and giveaways for memberships to Ancestry Fold 3. So learn more about what they do over at Ancestry.com. It's really a great service. I use it all the time. I've done a lot of my own ancestor research over there. So we're standing out at one of my favorite spots on the Gettysburg battlefield. We are actually, as Garry pointed out, between Cemetery Ridge and Seminary Ridge behind the camera. We're in the neighborhood of the Bliss farm. This would have been in 1863 the home of William and Adelman Bliss and their two daughters who are living down here on the Gettysburg battlefield. They owned about 60 acres here on the south end of the town. Now this was not just the Bliss farm out here. This is actually a small neighborhood. Behind me, you might be able to see the commodious Nicholas Cadore barn. That barn was not here at the time, but Nicholas Cadore does own a barn and a farm just over my shoulder. Behind the camera would be the David McMillan house. That house is a private residence today. We encourage you not to go to that house because the most dangerous and most lethal weapon in the world lives in there, and that is a Marine with a rifle, as John Pershing said, and that's one of our friends. But this was a neighborhood down here. We had the McMillans over here. We had the Blisses. Down the road, we have the Rogers, the Klingels, the Sherfies. So keep in mind that even though Gettysburg, it looks like it's fought on open fields, most of these are farm fields out here, and specifically where we're standing would have been owned by William and Adelman Bliss. Now William Bliss is 63 years old at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. He, his wife, and his two daughters are here in the house on July 1st, 1863, when they see coming up the Emmitsburg Road a column marching towards them, and that would be the Union 1st Army Corps, specifically James Wadsworth's division. Because they're trying to get to the battlefield as quickly as possible, the 1st Corps troops are actually going to cut across fields. They're going to go out towards Seminary Ridge and then eventually up to McPherson Ridge. To get there, Mr. McMillan is out in his fields with an axe, taking down his fences, helping to get those Union soldiers across the fields as quickly as possible. His two daughters, Carrie and, trying to remember the other name, Carrie and Laura, are out here with water, helping to tend to the soldiers, when finally they realize this battle is coming across these fields and they have to get out of Dodge because it's going to turn into an unmanageable situation. So the McMillan girls run down here to the Bliss farm, which would have stood right where we are, and they're going to tell the two Bliss girls that we need to get out of here. And the Bliss girls, who were hanging laundry, immediately grab what they can, go with the two McMillan girls, and they head over towards the Taneytown Road over to the Weichert farm where they'll spend the battle. Eventually, William and Adeline will do the same thing, as will the McMillans. They will get out of this neighborhood, as it were, and get off of the battlefield. Now, right over here to my right is actually what would have been the cellar of the Bliss house. The Bliss house would have been a white house out here at the time of the battle. Alexander Hayes, fighting Alec Hayes, who's a division commander with the 2nd Army Corps, will call that the damned little white house over and over again, and I'll tell you why he calls it that. On the other side of our camera over here, we might see a large berm, which just looks like a big, nasty, gnarly overgrowth, and that is actually the old bank of the bank barn here on the Bliss farm. This would have been a very large structure. The house itself was a double log and frame house, weatherboarded. It had 2 wells with pumps, a variety of fruit in the orchards, including peaches and cherries. One man said in the 14th Connecticut that Mr. Bliss was like many other Pennsylvania farmers who give more attention to the architecture and pretentiousness of their barns than they do to their homes. To tell you a little bit about the barn itself, the barn was a large, almost citadel itself. It was expensively and elaborately built structure, 75 feet long and 33 feet wide. Its basement was 10 feet high, constructed of stone, and its upper part 16 feet to the eaves. There was an overhang 10 feet long. There were 5 doors in the front wall of the basement and 3 windows in each end. 90 paces north of the barn was the mansion, right behind our camera, a frame building, 2 stories in height, as it had a front of 3 rooms width and 2 front doors, and there now remains 2 cellar excavations. When the Blisses leave their house, they will leave behind their very impressive library. They'll leave the beds made. The whole house will basically be left open to Union and Confederate soldiers. On July 2nd, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg rose in size and scale, and the Confederates, as we know, will start moving their way down Seminary Ridge. And out in the distance behind us will be Dick Anderson's division of Confederates of the Confederate 3rd Army Corps. Specifically, we will be looking at a Mississippi brigade commanded by Carnot Posey. Posey will send troops out into this no man's land, out to the Bliss farm, and we're about halfway between Seminary and Cemetery Ridge. Seminary Ridge is about 550 yards behind me. Cemetery Ridge is about 650 yards in front of me. So it's about halfway between the 2 lines. And out here will come eventually the 16th, the 19th, and 48th Mississippi, more than 1,000 skirmishers. This will be a big skirmish fight out here at the Bliss farm. There are more skirmishers up along Long Lane we'll talk about in a few minutes. We'll have more skirmishers heading down in that direction, but the major fight that will take place here will become very centrally focused on the Bliss farm. Looking back across Cemetery Ridge, we'll have the 3rd Division of the 2nd Corps sending troops over here. Fighting at Alec's men will start to come out into these fields as well. These include the 39th New York, the Garibaldi Guard, the 106th Pennsylvania from the Philadelphia Brigade, and then we'll see some Ohioans and others start to come out here. Eventually, this farm turns into a no man's land, because Confederates will get inside of the barn, inside of the house. They'll use them as fortifications. Then the Federals will come out and kick them out. Then we'll come back to Confederates. At least 10 times this farm will change hands. It's going to be a nasty place to be. The Confederates will use a fence line at the edge of the farm itself. Use that for cover. They'll launch their attacks from there and come back. The Federals will do the same thing along the Emmitsburg Road, utilizing a fence, and they will come surging forward time and time again. And eventually, these 2 sides will realize that these buildings are a huge nuisance, and in this little battle is taking on a life of its own. And in fact, we're going to start having artillery support from Willie Pegram. We heard about him on the first day's field here, lobbing shells into this area. So this is not a place you want to be if you're a Union and Confederate soldier. But most importantly, on July 2nd, as those attacks start coming from the south behind me towards Little Round Top, towards the Peach Orchard, Devil's Den, the wheat field, that echelon attack is starting to roll towards us, and 1 brigade at a time starts going forward. And as they keep going forward, eventually it will be the turn of Carnot Posey's Mississippians. But not all of them go forward because they're so tied up in this skirmish out here at the Bliss farm. The Bliss farm, I won't call it a turning point of the Battle of Gettysburg, but it's an important ingredient to the reason why the Federals are successful on July 2nd. This is going to tie down the Confederates, take their attention away, and they're going to come up a brigade or 2 short of being able to truly crack that center. Well, fast forward to July 3rd. The Bliss farm is still here. It's still a no man's land, and Alexander Hayes, along with Thomas Smythe, or Thomas Smith, depending on how you want to pronounce his name, are going to just be fed up with the fight that is taking place out here. So both generals, Union generals, or colonel at this time for Smith, start sending couriers out front. Burn the barn. Get rid of it. There was a lot of action out here between the 12th New Jersey, the Buck and Ball Regiment, the 14th Connecticut, but eventually running out here will be, find the man to give you, Sergeant Charles Hickok of the 111th New York. He's from Colonel Clinton McDougal's regiment. McDougal has a fantastic account of Hayes riding out here himself at one point and said it was the only time that he saw a general officer with his guidon flying behind him out on a skirmish line in a Civil War battle. But Hayes sends Hitchcock and others out here and says, burn the barn, burn the farm. And the Blisses will lose everything out here on July 3rd. William Bliss, whose family actually had a lot of tragedy in their lives, eventually move away from Gettysburg. They had come down from New York, Chautauqua, New York in the 1850s to establish their life here in Adams County. They give up their life here and head back to New York. They will fight for the rest of their lives to try to get any sort of compensation for this farm. In fact, Mr. Bliss will try to sell it in the by 1865, and he will put it on the market for $3,256.05. His neighbor, Nicholas Cadore, will say, I'll give you $1,000 for your farm. And that's what Bliss took. Bliss has moved away. Nicholas Cadore, by the way, has a tragic end of his own. He actually falls in front of his own thresher. It slices open his leg and he bleeds to death. It's a gruesome wound. But Mr. Bliss, when he died on August 18th, 1888, is allegedly said about this farm, let it go. If I had 20 farms, I would give them all for such a victory. So the Bliss family lost everything here at Gettysburg. But the Bliss farm's also an important story for Gettysburg a little bit later on, which most people don't realize. I'm going to grab the camera and show you some assets as we take a walk here. The Bliss farm is the site of a military installation that most people don't know was here in 1917 and 1918. The first one was the Camp of the United States Soldiers. That's the picture you're seeing right now on camera. Camp of the United States Soldiers trained World War I soldiers, and you're looking at the fields of Gettysburg. You're looking at the Vermont Brigade Monument out towards our area. They install more than 400 buildings, including a massive swimming pool over near the Angle. They also are going to put in, there will be a train line down through here, which was already here, and this will be a massive military installation. In fact, one of my ancestors trained here before he went to France, and was wounded in July of 1918. Now, fast forward another year, and we will have Camp Colt established in 1918. It's the first military installation in command of Dwight David Eisenhower. You see a young Ike there, Captain Dwight David Eisenhower, at the Camp Colt headquarters, which is over in the parking lot of General Pickett's Buffet. He's sitting there with a few British observers there. One man has a black band on his arm. That name is Frank Summers. Ike becomes friends with him and will correspond with him for the rest of his life. Frank Summers is a World War I veteran who had just lost his son at the Battle of Jutland, known as Jutland to us in the United States. And Summers is a veteran of the Somme, Passchendaele, Ypres, and other battlefields. And Ike, he's out here training tankers. For the first few months when he's out here, he doesn't have a tank. But on June 6th, 1944, June 6th, 1918, a very important date in Ike's history is June 6th. D-Day's on June 6, 1944. June 6, 1944, his son David graduates from West Point. And then here on June 6, 1918, he gets his first tank, and his only tank that he's able to train 10,000 tankers with. It's a Renault FT-17 tank. It does a maximum horsepower of 39 horsepower, and it can go a whopping 4 miles an hour. And you can see when they got their tank here in Gettysburg, everybody wanted a picture with this tank. And this is the tank going up over what is left of the Bliss Farm buildings, actually over the bank barn itself. So this is a pretty cool sight out here to see. And then the military will leave in 1918 after the war ends. See, everybody wanted their picture with this tank. Then in 1922, the Marines are on the chopping block. So in 1922, a Marine general named Smedley Butler, he's known as Old Gimlet Eye, a two-time Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, decides that he is going to go on a large public relations campaign, take his men to places like Antietam, the Wilderness, and Gettysburg, and invite everybody out and put on Marine exercises on the Gettysburg battlefield, Antietam, Wilderness, and other places. In this photo in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the Virginia Monument, and you can see out into the fields of Pickett's Charge exactly what this Marine encampment would look like. You can see bombers out there. You can see that they have tanks. They have 75mm artillery. They have everything that you can imagine, and that's looking out towards that old site itself. They're even going to bring in barrage balloons so that they have air cover. They thought it would be a really good idea to shoot one of those down and have a dummy jump out of it, which was actually in really poor taste because one of the airmen who came in, Marine aviators who came up here during this time, crashed his plane and died. So this was in kind of poor taste. But they invite anyone and everyone. They invite Civil War veterans. This is a Marine talking to a veteran on the 106th Pennsylvania Monument. They invite future Medal of Honor recipient Teddy Roosevelt Jr. There he is there with Jean Lejeune, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. They're also going to invite the press, and standing in the middle of that press gaggle is Warren G. Harding, president at the time. And they even set up a nice White House for the president over near the McMillan Farm. There's Smedley Butler pointing. There's Jean Pershing, Jean Lejeune, and Warren G. Harding. In fact, they fly 6 bathtubs in for the temporary White House, and it's allegedly the first time they ever flown bathtubs on a plane, and it was landed here on the Gettysburg battlefield. So there's your useless information for you for the day. But the Marine exercises will recreate everything that you can imagine from Pickett's Charge. They'll have veterans out here with their 75mm guns. The veterans will come out and actually fire some of these 75mm guns, and they put on a great display. And because of Smedley Butler and good public relations, the Marine Corps was not chopped away. So that's a really cool story from the Gettysburg battlefield. And to finish up where we are, we're actually out towards the end of Long Lane. I'm going to ask Gary to grab the camera. I'll grab my notes real fast. Step there. There you go. About here? All right. So we're actually in a neighborhood today. This would have been open farmland in 1863 going off in that direction. And in fact, we'd be near the what's called Long Lane. It's a long lane that would run out from the south end of town out to the Bliss farm, roughly where it terminates. And the Confederates will use this as a ready-made trench for their skirmish line. The skirmish line out in this area would not have been made up of Mississippians. It would have been North Carolinians and South Carolinians off in this direction. The line is going to be commanded by William Thompson Haskell. And I have to read you about the Haskell family here. Haskell has about 500 or so skirmishers out in this area. He's facing off towards Pickett's Buffet. He's engaging with units like the 136th New York, the 4th Ohio, the 73rd Ohio, where Richard Nixon's grandfather or great-grandfather is serving here at Gettysburg. So there's a lot of skirmishing taking place out in these fields. In fact, the 11th Corps skirmish line wrapped around Cemetery Hill from Pickett's Buffet up to Tommy's Pizza, up to the gas station at the intersection of the Baltimore Street and the Emmitsburg Road, Steinwehr Avenue, and then doubled back all the way to Culp's Hill. It's a massive skirmish line on the Union side, and there's a long line of Confederates out in this area. But Captain William Thompson Haskell was commanding the troops out here. He is a University of Virginia graduate and a descendant of William Thompson, who helped defend Sullivan's Island in 1776 from a British incursion. That's today we would call that Fort Moultrie for you Civil War folks. He led Company H of the 1st South Carolina Infantry and was one of the many Haskells in the Confederate Army. In fact, there are 7 of them. Let me tell you about them very quickly. His brother John Haskell had lost the arm at Gaines's Mill and commanded a battalion of artillery here at Gettysburg under John Bell Hood. And John Haskell left us a pretty good memoir and kind of calls John Bell Hood's wound here at Gettysburg, he almost calls it a flesh wound inside of his memoirs. So it's interesting, this guy who lost his arm, Hood, when he's wounded here, doesn't lose his arm, but he loses the use of it. He also is going to have another brother here named Langdon. He's on the staffs through the war of Maxcy Gregg, AP Hill, and Richard Anderson. Another one of his brothers commanded the 7th South Carolina Cav. His brother Joseph is on the staff of Edward Porter Alexander. Another brother, Lewis, is in the Palmetto Artillery. And another Haskell brother is in the 1st South Carolina Regulars, known as the 1st Regulars or Butler's Regulars. So we have these Haskells all going off to war. 5 of them return. Charles is killed here at Gettysburg, and we have the letter that talks about his death. His other brother, who is serving with the Butler's Regulars, will be killed at Fort Wagner, Battery Wagner, 8 days after Charles dies here at Gettysburg. So it was a rough month of July for the Haskell family. Chaplain George T. Williams of the 1st South Carolina wrote home from Gettysburg. He said, "I have only time to write, as I do with profound regret and real sympathy, that your excellent son, William T., was killed in the fight of July 2nd instant near Gettysburg. And his body was carefully buried the next day on the farm of J.A. Heinzelman, 4 miles to the west of town, with a headboard distinctly marked. Langdon, Haskell, was safe at 10 o'clock on the evening of the 3rd instant. May God comfort and sustain you. He was a noble son, and I loved him well. Truly we sorrow, not as those without hope." The reason that George T. Williams has to write so quickly is on July 4th, Lee is initiating the retreat from Gettysburg. And William T. Haskell is going to receive, before the Confederate Army pulls out of here, a proper burial, a Christian burial here on the battlefield. So this is just one of the stories here that you would see. The Avery family on the other side over near Culp's Hill, that is another story for another time, but the Averys are having a civil war at home and a civil war here on the battlefield itself. Isaac famously will will be mortally wounded on the fields of Culp's Hill, attacking East Cemetery Hill, and he will write a note that says, "Tell my father I died with my face to the enemy." But while the Averys on that side are serving and having one of the Avery brothers on that side of the hill die, another Avery brother will be on this side of the hill, commanding the 33rd North Carolina, and he will not survive the war either. So we have a lot of death here amongst the Confederates. The Haskell family will lose two sons within 8 days of one another. And the Avery brothers, the Averys who fought out here, there'll be 12 Averys who are in the family from North Carolina. 4 of them will not return from the American Civil War, including Isaac here at Gettysburg. So we have a lot of stories out here from this battlefield. You need to come out here and engage with them. You know, probably the most famous story is of Richard Enderland from this part of the battlefield, when he goes out and pulls a wounded soldier off the battlefield named George Nixon of the 73rd Ohio, who's buried here in Gettysburg National Cemetery, and he is the great-grandfather of Richard Nixon. The battles that took place out here, which were once open fields, were heavy skirmishing. They didn't have the larger impact on the Battle of Gettysburg that maybe the attack at Devil's Den or Little Round Top or Culp's Hill did, but every soldier's story out on this part of the battlefield is just as important. From every small skirmish, from the American Revolution all the way up to today's War on Terror, every time a soldier goes into action, that is the most important battle to them. It could be 2 guys shooting at one another, or it could be more than 100,000 men on each side having at it. So remember that when you come out to these battlefields. Every one of these soldiers who's serving here, killed, wounded, captured, missing, or came out of here unscathed, every one of them has some sort of a scar of war that they carry home with them. Garry, anything to add?
No, very well said, Kris. Are the green things moving there, Sarah? I'm just giving Kris an opportunity to grab the camera so that he can wrap it up here. So thanks, Kris, for those excellent descriptions there, and thank you all for watching. Thanks to Sarah for just reminding me to keep the mic up closer to my face. We have a lot more coming. We hope you'll join us. We hope you'll share this with your friends, and we thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.